Welcome to another edition of the Corner Booth Podcast here from the Snowdon Deli. I'm Aaron Rand from CJD, along with Bill Brownstein of the Montreal Gazette. Today, our special guest, former leader of the federal NDP and now the most sought-after political analyst in Canada, Tom Mulcair. Tom, thank you for being here.
Salut, Aaron.
Did I get that right? Perfect. Just as you wrote it. Perfect. Listen, first of all, thank you so much for being here. I know
It's
you're
great
very,
to be
very
back.
busy. Appreciate you coming back. It's been a busy week, and it's going to keep being a busy week in politics, both provincially and federally. I want to start with a new poll that actually came out this morning, showing that the Liberals and the PQ are tied at 30%. Yeah. So let's delve into that, because even though that might look really good for the Liberals, you have to break it down, because that's not going to win you an election.
Not the way it's set up, because that's our system. And so Montreal is going to be a lock for the Liberals the way it's coming out now. Their numbers are super solid in the greater Montreal area. Couldn't be better for them. It's the minute you get outside into where the CAQ used to win all of their seats, what we lovingly called Kakistan, there the Liberals are going to have a hard time breaking through. Because right now they're only at 17% amongst French-speaking voters. So that's job one for Mr. Mulcair and the Liberal team, is to boost those numbers. Now they have done, and I'm thrilled to say it because I've been watching them just go like this, that they have done something amazing in the past week, which is start rolling out really serious candidates. Last week, René Verret, 32-year experienced Crown prosecutor. Law and order is ripe to become a big issue in this campaign. So many people are just let go without a trial, despite the fact that they've done something horrible, because we don't have enough prosecutors. Our justice system is falling apart. Everybody sees it when the hospitals are falling apart, when the schools are falling apart. But people don't really see the justice system, but it's essential to our democracy. And Simon-Jolin Barrette, that we all know for having laws that go against linguistic minorities and against religious minorities, he's also the guy in charge of the justice system. He's allowed it to fall apart, and the Liberals have a real opportunity to go full law and order on that.
So with her, the CAQ.
Yeah.
I mean, essentially, you were initially, a lot of people thought Madame Fréchette would bring some sort of energy, but now we're seeing same old CAQ.
That's unfortunately what's happening to her. It didn't take very long for that to start to wear down. She is a very fresh face on the political landscape in Quebec. She does not go after these issues like attacking religious minorities with Bill 21, attacking the English-speaking community with Bill 96. But at the same time, she's not doing anything about it. She brought back the same old gang. Let's stick with the justice minister. He's still the justice minister. And she did nothing about that. So she can talk until the cows come home about the fact that she's got a new government. Well, when your new government is comprised of the same old faces around the cabinet table, you haven't changed anything fundamental. She has not had the courage to stand up to the people who have used divisive techniques on language, on religion, against immigrants. She hasn't stood up to them. She's gone along with them because she figures she has to keep them in tow. She's not gonna be able to pull it off.
Yeah, that includes today, when we found out that the idea of vocational schools, et cetera, they would be subject to these same laws under Bill 96. That's 25,000 people who are not subject to it now. We're going to actually study in English, who would now have to study in French.
And not only is that a huge problem for those people, but if you think about it, the structure is already there to give those courses in carpentry, in car mechanics, and so forth. And yes, people who have come here who have enough English to be able to learn a trade, who, if you let them go into the workforce, will quickly master French. But right now they're trying to say, no, we're going to cut them off. But there's no place to train them on the French side. The places don't exist. The infrastructure doesn't exist. And this is where I see Christine Fréchette playing the same old games, very divisive approach to politics, and I think it's going to be very hurtful to her chances in the next.
To your point, though, about her, the one thing I think is interesting is we're seeing you have good weeks and bad weeks, apparently, in presidential politics, right? Charles Milliard was one. But if we go back to Christine Fréchette, I think we saw right at the beginning, that honeymoon phase, if you will, which she took over. She said some things, talked about the welcome tax, reducing it, et cetera. And then all of a sudden, the first day in the National Assembly's premiere, let's go ahead and renew the notwithstanding clause, even though preemptively, there's a year before that even has to happen. And she took a lot of flack for that.
One, she took a lot of flack for that because it was so transparent that it was just a way to try to trip up the Liberals. It had nothing to do with substance. There There was no reason to do it whatsoever. And there was another detail that everybody noticed. Francois Legault was no friend of the English-speaking community, but he always understood that there were 1 million people in Quebec for whom English is the first official language. And guess what? He would always throw a couple of sentences in English into his key speeches in the House. She has steadfastly refused to say a word of English. And I know because we've talked about it here, and she simply won't go. The number one flagship radio station of the English-speaking community is CJAD 800. She won't come on the air at CJAD.
Yeah, she will be asked her on multiple occasions.
And
by the way, she speaks excellent English.
Yeah.
Fluent,
Right?
Fluent.
Better than Francois Legault.
Oh, much better.
So,
Yeah.
But it's interesting, the latest poll that you brought up, 13% only. I would have figured after this whole business about the notwithstanding clause, her coming into power and all the rest, the CAC numbers would be way up there, but not really.
18.
Or is
she's
it
at
18?
So she's a titch above where Legault was. 13 is the Quebec Conservatives under
Okay.
Eric Duhem. But again, my strong feeling, and I predicted it a year ago in the federal election. I said, watch out, get out of the way. NDP is going to become squashed on the side of the road. This is going to be a two-way battle. Carney's Liberals, Poilievre's Conservatives. There's no room for other players.
Yeah.
Same thing's going to happen here. 70% of Quebecers want nothing to do with a referendum and even less to do with separation. PQ, Paul Saint-Pierre Plamondon, PSPP as he's called, is going headlong after a referendum promising it. The 70% of Quebecers who don't want a referendum or separation are going to come to a strategic choice in the last few weeks of the campaign. Who's the vehicle who can make sure that that doesn't happen? And the fight has been so far for those hearts and minds between the CAC and the Liberals. But I sense that Milliard is starting to pull ahead. He's starting to get good advice. Finally, on this notwithstanding clause, after a week of up and down, he clearly didn't understand the file, which is a problem in and of itself. Not that he doesn't understand it. There's tons of stuff you don't understand when you come in as a leader. But he doesn't have the wherewithal to put in place somebody who say, okay, explain this notwithstanding clause to me. Otherwise, I could get in trouble. He just started talking in front of the cameras, and he said 3 different things in 3 different days, and he got in trouble. Now it looks like he's settling down. He's bringing in top flight star candidates to run for the Liberals, and that shows 2 things. That people like the idea, and those people feel that for their career, they're going with a party that has a real chance of forming a government, and that communicates something positive at the same time.
To your point, though, so you mentioned the first appointment with respect to law and order.
Yeah.
Right? And it's interesting because I think obviously Michel Leblanc, former, Chamber of Commerce, there's your economic guy.
Yeah.
So he's actually filling holes that need to be filled that are key in this election.
Dr. Cossette, former rector of University of Sherbrooke, respected medical professor, he's going to be running in Sherbrooke. So this guy's got a health minister written all over him. And so he's showing he's able to put forward a team, but he's going to have to learn to back off a little bit himself because he's been throwing himself in front of the cameras. Yeah. If you go in front of those cameras in that hot room in Quebec City and you come in even slightly unprepared, he would come in and start throwing banana peels under his own feet, talking about 2 official languages. By the way, technically he's right. Yeah. Because English and French are the 2 languages of the National Assembly. But you don't talk about Quebec having 2 official languages. Otherwise,
because you're on the front page of the Journal de Montréal.
It's a piling on effect from the whole press gallery in Quebec City. And he's either going to figure out how to deal with it and get the right people. Right now, he seems to have surrounded himself first and foremost with people that he was comfortable with. Well, find a few people who are really good, even if you're less comfortable with them. Because they might have the guts to say, boss, if you go out there unprepared on the notwithstanding clause, you're going to get clobbered. Nobody was able to tell him that. And then they started backfilling. They sent in poor Andre Pratt. I like Andre Pratt, smart guy. But they sent him in to write 2 columns, one in English, one in French, to try to explain why the incomprehensible answers of Charles Milliard on the notwithstanding clause were actually clear as a bell. I don't think too many people were convinced. And if it was that clear, why did you have to write 2 articles to explain?
How long does that stick to you?
It's a process of establishing who you are. Are you a person who masters this stuff or has the modesty to go get the answer from people who do master it before you start talking about it? Or do you just figure, well, I've had good jobs before, I can just wing it in front of the cameras? It's a big mistake. So I think that Milliard is one mistake on language away from really getting tagged on the language file. So he better surround himself with some really smart people who can give him, think of somebody trying to get across a river without getting wet. You're going to go from rock to rock. You've got to have your answers prepared. And it doesn't mean that you're not smart. And Trudeau was amazing at this, by the way. This is one of his characteristics that drove journalists up the wall, because he would come to a press conference with the 5 stepping stones ready to get across the river. And they would ask him a question here. He would go back to the stepping stone and repeat it. And he would keep going to his other point, and then they would hit him again with another question. He just kept repeating the things that had been prepared in advance. It's incredibly frustrating. But how many times did Justin Trudeau get in trouble for saying the wrong thing? Not very often.
Well, but he still got in trouble. They were out to get him often.
They were out to get him often, and people were just exhausted of seeing his mug.
But that's what happened.
And he was about to get thrown out. And we would have had Pierre Poilievre as prime minister.
Right.
And then the Liberals were smart enough to go and
By the way, in the case of Charles Milliard, just for clarity's sake, if you will, he's not a politician.
Right. No, and that
kind of works against him in a sense of not knowing how to.
It can be an advantage because the average Quebecer is giving him a chance.
Right.
Saying, well, we don't know. This guy seems to look okay. He's got a good voice. He seems articulate. But the question is, and the people who do the analysis, the punditry, there's a great division. So there are some people who will never give him a chance because they're on the PQ side, and they want separation. So it doesn't matter what he says.
Right.
You
he could walk on water.
Walk on water, and then the title, he doesn't know how to swim.
Speaking of law and order, though, PSPP has been floating this espionage business that the feds are out to get them. And then I hear Jolin Barrette also said, he concurred that they're, which I found very, very bizarre. What's this all about?
It's about nothing.
But they don't have any proof of anything.
Of course not. And so that's why it's so amusing to watch him. But I watched him go yesterday because he is very good at attracting cameras and microphones.
Right.
He's Trump-esque in that regard. He knows how to stay in the news. So nobody's been paying attention to him. Milliard's been soaking up a lot of news for the wrong reasons. Fréchette's been visiting Washington, visiting Ottawa, about to go to Europe. He's been looking for a place in the news. So Claude Morin, a former PQ muckety-muck and an elected member, close advisor of René Lévesque, it came out years later, had been in secret a stool. He had been an informer against the PQ for the RCMP. He even had a code name, French Minuet. I mean, it was mildly embarrassing. He tried to explain it for years and years. He just passed away at 96. So out of this, somehow he invented the story that maybe they're spying on our caucus. Like, there's 6 of them. Like, give it a break. So he says, when we come in, you have to take your cell phone and put it into a Faraday case so nothing can come. Really, you really believe that the federal government is sending in spies because they don't know that you want to have a referendum on sovereignty?
But he does it anyway. It will appeal to his base.
Because there's tons of stories about it today in the paper.
Yeah.
That's called being on top of the news cycle. Yeah.
Unreal.
So look,
It is unreal. Well, in the most literal sense, it's unreal. Because it's baloney.
I want to just for a second talk about federal politics. You were involved, and I'm sure you watch this. Obviously, you do. You talk about this all the time. But I saw a poll, or maybe this was in David Paletto's piece the other day, saying that Mark Carney's approval level as prime minister is among the highest
Stratospheric.
Sitting prime minister.
Stratospheric.
And yet at the other end, you can watch Pierre Poilievre every day telling you everything that Mark Carney is doing wrong and trying to make a point. What's Mark Carney doing right that has allowed him, even for Canadians who are not necessarily in favor of, Mark Carney, what's he doing right that all of a sudden this approval rating continues to rise to this level?
I think it has a lot to do with form and later with substance. But the form of Mark Carney is engaging, affable, likable. And the average person looks at this guy and said, he's really smart. He's really informed. He knows what he's talking about. Poilievre is not a dummy, but his strident, scratchy voice, his tone, always nagging at you, you don't want to buy it. Whereas Carney is, if you walked into a room and there were, a bunch of tables mostly filled up, but there were a couple of empty places here and there, would you spontaneously go to the table where Carney was sitting or the table where Poilievre was sitting? I mean, ask yourself that question. And people don't want a part of Pierre Poilievre. That's why he's in so much trouble. But Carney also has been doing things that Canadians want. He's been saying, we're going to develop our resources, but we're going to do it while respecting the environment. We're going to change the norm here. We're going to respect the Paris Accord there. Some liberals, like I heard Stephen Guilbeault the other day rending his garments saying, oh, he's like, it's supposed to be an insult. He's like Stephen Harper. No, Justin Trudeau was there for 9 years. Every report, we had 2, what we call we have commissioners for sustainable development. They're out of the Auditor General's department. Very neutral, independent. They just look at the numbers. Are we respecting our international obligations to reduce greenhouse gases and, fight climate change? Answer, the 9 years of Trudeau, no. No plan, nothing. But we got so much, sorry for the wordplay, but so much hot air out of Trudeau, you would have almost believed that we were world leaders on the environment. Carney comes at it differently, saying, no, I'm going to reduce the time it takes to approve a project or reject it. But we're not going to spend years after year studying these things. We're going to have a much more efficient way of doing it. And we will develop our resources where it makes sense. And we'll say no to a project if it doesn't make sense. And we're going to have rules and techniques to reduce greenhouse gases. Canadians are buying into that. Trudeau used to always use the same sentence. Oh, well, economy and environment, they're two sides of the same coin. But he did nothing. Whereas Carney is saying, no, we're developing. The economy needs it. Trump is scary. The world has changed. We've got to find new trade partners. We've got tons of natural resources that the world, including the Americans, really want, and we're going to develop them.
The Corner Booth podcast is brought to you in part by the Snowdon Delicatessen, where we are. 75 years in business, the hub of Montreal's greatest smoked meat, plus Carnotzel, potato latkes, and the famous Snowdon Deli party sandwiches. That's the Snowdon Delicatessen. But what do you say then when you hear Poilievre, and this has been his recurring theme, Mark Carney said he would do this, and he talked tough, and get Donald Trump, and then he looks, he says, and what have we ended up with? What has he ended up doing?
And every time he says that, instead of looking at Mr. Poilievre's and saying, it would be kind of amazing if Pierre Poilievre was there instead of Carney, people go, I'm so glad Carney is there and not Poilievre. But it backfires on him. Yeah. And then he attacks the media as he did last weekend, saying how bad they are to him. And then he says, well, Carney stole another one of my ideas. So you're applauding, right? No, I'm complaining. So, he's got no room to maneuver.
Right.
And I do, because of my work on the private side, I have tons of colleagues who are conservatives, many of whom have worked to get Poilievre into that job. And not one of them thinks that Poilievre is going to be the leader of the Conservatives at the next campaign.
What's incredible? He's exceptionally popular in Quebec, which I find, except for you way back when.
Carney, his numbers are wild.
Wild. I mean, I can't.
In Greater Montreal, I think it's like 67%.
Yeah, right.
Something crazy like that.
But that's wild.
It is. It's
and I mean, for an Anglo.
Like and everybody was always Bockety French in this. So when the Terrebonne riding had to have a re-election after the Supreme Court ruled, they had won it by one vote. The Supreme Court said it wasn't clear enough. You got to start over again. Fine. I watched the block and I was in awe because, boy, it's this show organizational ability. The decision comes out by the Supreme Court. They're in front of the cameras immediately. And then the date gets chosen. They've got their candidate. They're in front of the cameras immediately. They had her. She was the one who had been defeated. They had her on I even thought that Radio-Canada was leaning over backwards to help the Bloc Québécois, getting interview after interview, no hard questions. I said, this is going to be very tough. The Liberals won by 500 votes in a by-election. That's a lot in a by-election. So I'm going to keep an eye on Alexandre Boulris's riding, which is, Rosemont, Petite Patrie. I have a feeling that Carney, if he chooses the right candidate, might snatch that from the NDP column and beat out the Bloc and anybody else who might.
It's kind of make you wonder why Alexandre Boulris elected to leave federal
for
and run in a local election as a Quebec Solidaire.
For Quebec.
Yeah, because Ottawa is actually closer for him than Quebec City, so it's not a question of the timing. I just think that he's been in with Quebec Solidaire since day one. He's always agreed with them. Now he says that he's a separatist. Well, when he was with Jack, he would always say, no, I promise that's over. Who knows? But he's going to fight hard to keep the riding. That is the Quebec Solidaire riding of Bois. I think that's going to be a tough battle for him, too. Because the PQ and the Liberals are going to be fighting for that riding. There's nothing guaranteed for him that he's going to hold on to it provincially.
So Bill brought up the issue of Mark Carney's popularity in Quebec. Something that I think at the beginning we all wondered, how is this happening? But it continues to happen.
Oh, yeah.
He's not losing any popularity. So I guess my question would be, come the election here provincially, how much of an impact would Mark Carney have in this election?
Smart question.
Famously, Prime Minister
certainly on a referendum
has to stay back.
Smart question. He will stay back because he'll be well advised to stay back. But if he has a big announcement to make at Bombardier, he'll be there.
Yeah, right.
And he won't let any of the candidates into the room this time around. He let Fréchette in because she was the premier.
Right.
But that's a really good question. I do think that there's a halo effect around Carney that could rub off positively for Charles Milliard and the Quebec Liberals. Because the insecurity of Trump, people who haven't been through it, the last referendum was more than 30 years ago. So people who haven't been through them, and that's a lot of voters, just sort of going, what's the big deal about that threat? People who have been through it and are now going through Trump, and Quebecers are at least as worried about Trump as anybody else in Canada, perhaps more so. And looking at Trump on the horizon, looking at the mess of possible separation, I think that could all, as this starts to congeal, as the jello starts to firm up, I think that could work out in the Liberals' favor. Yeah,
I have no doubt. It's very interesting from your point. You had the NDP going in Quebec.
Yeah.
And you had it going very nicely. And then suddenly, what's going on now? I mean, people floor crossing, like people leaving Avi Lewis. I mean, you must find that shocking.
Well, Lewis is a smart guy. I mean, he comes from a good lineage.
Well, great lineage, yes.
Of NDPers. But he's not practically minded. So Quebecers are practically minded. Jack Layton, Le Bon Jack, was well liked because he had social ideas, economic ideas that connected with a lot of people. Avi Lewis wants the federal government, because it does everything else so well, he also wants them to run grocery stores.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that resonates with a lot of people, you know? And so he won't...
Gas stations, maybe, but not
the real test is going to come when the by-elections start happening. So there's going to be a by-election to replace Jonathan Wilkinson in British Columbia. He's been living in British Columbia. That's where he ran twice. Is he not going to run in the first by-election? When Jack became the leader of the NDP, he knew that the number one thing he had to do was get elected. You can't be the leader of a party and not get elected. When Outremont opened up and I had declared that I was coming in with Jack, I'll share with you that we didn't have a lot of people here, but the key advisors and staff here in Quebec didn't want me to run in Outremont. They said, because we always lose in Quebec and we can't afford to have our Quebec lieutenant lose a by-election. And I remember Jack, we announced like just around the corner from here, Jack saying, you're going to have to come up with a heck of a lot better argument than that for me not to run my new Quebec lieutenant in the first by-election that comes open. And he made the call. I was all in with it. He said, I promise you, every resource that we have, every person who can say 8 words of French, no matter where they're from, we're going to ship them all in and we're going to win this thing. And we did, because you have to have the courage to run. But Lewis has run twice. He did even worse the second time than the first time. He lost both times. And he's gun shy and he doesn't want to run. But if you don't want to run in politics, then get out of the way. What are you doing in politics? For him, my perception is that politics is a soapbox that he puts down and he expounds. So he's very happy. He gives interviews with this person and he gives a long interview with that person. So he expounds. But it's not going anywhere. It's not going to get him any votes, and it's probably not going to get them any.
It's got to be disheartening, though, for you to see a party like which had a great voice.
It'll come back from the ashes, though. I mean, look, I'll make a bold prediction. The NDP will be vying again, plausibly, to form a federal government the day that Wab Kinew, the Premier of Manitoba, comes the head of the NDP. It's not going to happen under Avi Lewis.
Right. Tom, I would be remiss if I did not bring up something else that happened in provincial politics this week, and I talked about it on my show, this Quebec Solidaire idea to tax the rich as a solution, not just to deal with Quebec's economy, but if you listen to Saul Zanetti, to save the planet.
Well, there we go.
So what do you think?
Well, I think that you better start paying so that the planet gets saved. About time.
Okay.
So this is a little bit in the same category. It might seem like a non sequitur, but it is in the same idea category of the PQ talking about being spied upon, because it gets them attention. So they actually named a wealthy Quebec businessman, said he has to pay more. He put the bait and went and pushed back on them and said, take a hike. So they won, because nothing's going to happen as a result of it. But they won in the public sphere. They were at the top of the news cycle. People have been talking about them more and more. So that's good political communication, because the whole purpose is have people talk about you. And so, Quebec Solidaire is at 8% in the polls, which will result in the exact same number of seats as the Quebec Conservatives, 0. And they're not going to, that party is going to go through the same thing the NDP went through in the last election. Maybe 1 or 2 of them will hold on because they're popular locally, but overall the party's going to get squashed like a bug. Why? Because the fight is going to be, do you want separation with the PQ, or do you want a vehicle, whichever one you decide on, strategically, that can stop these guys from holding another referendum trying to break up the country?
Right.
And there's no room.
Is that really what we're coming back to again 30 years
100%.
later? A fight over separation?
100%.
Separation?
That's going to be that's the ballot question in the next election, from my point of view. Quebec Solidaire, by the way, is a bit of an anomaly because on paper, if you read their program, they're a separatist party.
Right.
But I don't know about you, but I know like dozens of people who work as volunteers and work within Quebec Solidaire. I don't know one of them who will vote yes in a referendum. They're all lefties. They're the lefties that I used to work with in the NDP. They're people whose hearts are in the right place, who want to work in community groups and so forth. They like Quebec Solidaire's social programs and ideas. Fine. But they're supposed to be sovereignist. And what's going to happen is a lot of them are going to go back to the Liberal fold. And amongst the separatists, as soon as they see that Quebec Solidaire is doing this, they're going to float back to the Parti Québécois. And again, it'll be like the last election. Right. It's just going to be a fight to the finish, and it's going to be polarized, and we're going to go back to a two-horse race.
Can I just bring up one person we haven't talked about? And you just said now you think this will end up the same way with 0 seats, and that's Eric Duhem and the Conservatives.
Yeah.
I sense they had some wind beneath their wings for a while.
Yeah, and they're starting to drop.
Yeah, and then all of a sudden Eric Duhem writes this book, and now it's, the corrupt federal. He's going to Alberta to talk to the separatists there. Yeah. And I'm wondering if people who thought, this was a fresh face with fresh ideas, is really just kind of, going back.
I remember him
was original
at a podium with a big sign with a red diagonal line through Bill 96, and he was going to abolish it. He's not talked about any of that stuff anymore. He's talking about having fights with the feds. He's decided that
toxic federalism, right? That's what he called it.
So what's he going to do? He's going to forget about, you will not see him in Côte Saint-Luc or Hampstead this time around, okay? Where's he going to be? He's going to be in and around Quebec City. He's going to circle around because they've got cash, because there's a dollar per vote system that exists here in Quebec. So the money has been there rolling in since the last campaign because he's got a lot of votes. He got no seats. So he's got cash. And so he's just going to spend it in Quebec City. He's going to go after the 5, 6, maybe 8 ridings where he thinks he has a fighting chance, knock that down to 3 or 4, and hope that he and 1 or 2 others can get elected. I don't believe it for a second. People like the guy because he's always been that strident fellow. I mean, I used to go on his radio show in Quebec City. He's
very personable,
smart guy, but 0 experience and no team. Unlike the Liberals and Milliard has no political experience, but boy, his party got deep experience and very good people, and they're rolling out star candidates. They're going to be able to say, this is what a cabinet table looks like for the Libs. Yeah. He cannot do that. No serious person is going to run for him. That's his problem.
I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up one of your favorite figures, the Jolly Orange Giant in China, and curious as to what you think might transpire. It's kind of interesting, too, how the shots he took at Carney for thinking to engage and trade with China. Now he's there.
Yeah. But contradictions don't matter with Trump. And I've spent years predicting that, this is the most outrageous thing he's ever done. Surely he won't recover from that, but he always does.
Yeah.
But the numbers are starting to tell the story that as he heads into the fall elections, the so-called midterms, that it's not going to go well for him. He could lose both houses.
He's gerrymandering a lot.
Gerrymandering, but the Democrats learned to gerrymander back as they did in California. Yeah, sure. And so the game goes on. I think that eventually the courts are going to have to start reeling some of that stuff back in. Overall, the Americans have a system where it's one person, one vote. Despite the gerrymandering, every single congressional seat gets recounted to make sure that they all have the same number. Here in Quebec, we've got vastly different numbers per riding. And if you live up north where I live, you're very underrepresented. They're trying desperately to add a seat up north to try to even it out. So Trump goes after everything with equal incompetence. He is hopeless. I mean, he's already won. How many times has he told us he's won the Iran war?
No, he's in no rush to finish it.
He's no rush to finish. But a month ago, he said it was already finished and he had won.
Yeah.
Except it's these really bothersome land, mines under the water that could blow up any ship, and they're still controlling the Strait of Hormuz. And now he's gone to China to beg President Xi to try to help him reel in Iran that he's already demolished. So it's pure Trump.
And so before we wrap up, and we talked about this before, about municipal politics. We have a brand new mayor of Montreal, Sarai.
I'm a big fan.
As am I. Yeah. And I just wonder, with respect to what's gone on, I heard someone complain the other day, she's been in office since November and we still have potholes. And what? Yeah, hard to believe. And then the idea that you heard the story this week, are 2 Python 500 pothole filling machines are on the fritz, and this is not going to get done until 2027. That aside, how would you assess her first, say, 6 months in office?
I think she's great. She is a breath of fresh air. She's highly competent. She's out there a lot. I mean, early on, I remember she did a stunt with the hard hat on and the jacket, and I'm sort of going, "Oh, don't
Coder style.
don't do it, don't do it." But somebody on her communications staff thought it would be a cute look for her to be filling potholes, and then all hell broke loose, and there were 40,000 a day appearing on the paper. So she's going to have to learn about that sort of stuff. But she's really thrown herself at it to try to fix things. And we drove today. We're coming in from up north. We get off the auto route. We took Lackady all the way up from the 40 all the way up to Graham. It's an embarrassment. Like if I had a friend driving in from Boston, driving on that road, and I was I wouldn't have an explanation for it. There's no way to explain in a first world country, member of the G7, that roads can look like that. And it's an embarrassment. She's going to do her part on the municipal side. The province has just done nothing. Speaking of Laurentian Auto, it's been under repair for forever, and it's still horrible. So until somebody makes that a priority, maybe we should add that to the list of things that Milliard can talk.
By the way, do you buy into the conspiracy? And I know administrations do this, right? The previous administration left these things to just basically sit there, knowing that, if they lost the municipal election, it would look bad for the next party.
You don't have to have a conspiracy theory to know that Valerie Plante was no longer managing the city. She wasn't paying attention to anything. I thought her first term was quite good. Her second term, she just drifted and showed little interest. It was clear to me that she was not running again. She kept saying she was. Turned out that she wasn't going to. And they just let the city fall apart. But it wasn't part of a conspiracy to leave it to somebody else, because they really thought they were going to win the election. They didn't think that Soraya Martinez Ferrado would win. She did win. She won convincingly and solidly. And I think she's a darn good mayor.
So that wasn't the theory, then, even for the next guy?
No.
Okay.
That would require
that. I need a conspiracy. That's not good.
This will plague every mayor to come for the next 150 years in Montreal.
Yep.
So,
Tom, before we let you go, can't let you go without a prediction. Habs, Sabres.
oh,
Habs.
How many?
7.
Okay. Oh, that was easy.
that was
Okay.
great.
That wraps up our edition. I want to thank you so much for coming on. It's always great to see you.
Thank you very much, Tom. That's great.
That takes care of another edition of the Corner Booth Podcast from the Snowdon Deli. We'll see you again soon.